It's proven to not be
Alright.
super important. That's the magnetic ability to hold nutrients, cation exchange capacity. The higher, the more nutrients it can hold. The lower, the less nutrients it can hold. But that's talking about the magnetic ability to hold it. When we're talking about silica, it is a lower cation exchange, but what it does is the silica in there, through weatherization in your organic soil, will now start to grab onto other elements and create a tight bond and not leach out of the soil. It's different than cation exchange, but it's still making silicates in your soil that the plant can use. And so when you mentioned phosphorus uptake and helping that, there are studies you can research that say, hey, 40 to 60% increase in the efficient use of phosphorus when you're using silica with it. So remember those things. Silica, it's not like it's just magnetically holding it all, but we can't grow in straight clay. So high cation exchange is one way to hold nutrients, but absorption versus just adsorption. Adsorption is the cation exchange. This absorbs it like a sponge. It can hold on to things and can make silicate compounds. And so many ways to use it. You mentioned the stress and the tolerance side of it. If you live somewhere like I do, where the Colorado, the sun's intense, it's not very humid, the wind beats on you, you're going to notice a significant difference in your side-by-side test. If you've got a perfect environment, the plant may not require as much silica that round, and you may not see as dramatic of a stress test. I don't like to make claims. I'm not going to say it's going to double your yield or anything like that, but he mentioned when you try this, using what you normally use, and I think you'll find extreme benefit to that because it's going to more efficiently use it. That's why we add it to the craft blend, and that's why we add it to our soils. You know, when we look at that, I mean, all the way down here, like, let's see what we've got. There's even more you could test for, but we got like zirconium and vanadium and all these different elements that are part of a rock dust. A lot of times you're after that, but we can't straight get it. So when we use kelp meal on soil, it comes with some arsenic. And it's been proven safe for a long time, but a lot of guys are scared to add a lot of it. Where this, it's different. If you had too much kelp meal, major problems. Excesses and hormones and all sorts of things. But growers for a long time used green sand, right? We never carried green sand here. There was a certain mine that was better than others, but the reason why growers used green sand, it was silica, right? But it had potassium, and that's why they thought the benefit was there. I think silica was probably a bigger part of it, but this one in particular, if you look, potassium has 5% potassium. So this will make some potassium silicates right there in your soil, and it will be effective to use. And it's not potassium hydroxide, liquid extracted in a barrel at like 14 pH. It's totally natural. It's much easier to use. But then you notice there's calcium, there's magnesium, there's manganese, there's molybdenum. All of these are of importance. And Dr. Faust talked about the lichen on the lava rock and how quickly that can all happen. The rock was the key to that. And so we just keep coming back to this. Coop had me watch a video. You should look it up. It was about basalt, and it was about rock dust. It was about the creation and geology of our Earth. And so the first amino acids that begat life started to begin with some of the initial breakdown of the energy of the Earth in these rock dust materials. So, like, you could go all the way down and, like, start to talk about the foundation of life when it comes to silicon, rock dust, and building soil. And that's really why we have to be out here today. Because that's what we do. We're building soil.
Yeah, living soil, that's what it's about. I really appreciate you having me, and I'm a big fan of building soil.
It's been really good having you out here tonight. I'm even more excited about using the material, and I hope that you guys have great questions for us. Robbie's super easy to access, so if there's something I can't answer, I'll call out to him and we'll discuss it. As always, put questions in here. Ask questions to Robbie. Tell your friends about this. If you want to discuss silicon, silicic acid, those products, I'm all ears. I want to talk about it here below in the comments. Thank you so much. This has been another Build a Soil product highlight. Hope that you appreciate all this stuff. Hope it helps in your garden. Like always, subscribe, like, put some comments in here, tell your buddies, and I'll see you on the next episode. Hello and welcome to the Build a Soil YouTube series. This is season 3. We're on episode 5, and today we're honoring a legend. Clackamas Coop basically helped me start the company, whether he knew it or not at the time. And now he's worked right alongside with us, making sure that we honor the original intentions, and he's also taught me a ton about sourcing ingredients, composts, and everything in between. So, along with sharing all of our stuff with you, making a Coots-based soil, like our living organic soil recipes. I want to do one better. I want to make it just like Coot would make it. I want to explain where the recipe came from, why it's so important, and also the ingredients that are in it, and really do Coot an honor right here on this episode by making it from scratch using all worm castings just like he was. So Coot, if you're watching, we really appreciate everything you've done for Build a Soil, and I think that running your genetics in your soil recipe made the Build a Soil way is going to be a really good way to put a highlight on our Season 3 10x10 series. So, to get started, one of the things that you should know before I talk about the recipe is Coot does this in a special way, and nobody does it the same as he does. He makes his own worm castings from scratch.
Come back later.
He adds special ingredients throughout that process so that when he gets to the soil mixing phase, he's essentially just using his worm castings and not adding all the ingredients that we're going to add. You can still add some of them, but the idea would be to have the worms pre-work all of this into the compost, and then you'd make the soil from it. That being said, we've tested it a number of different ways, and Coot agrees. Mixing this with good castings at this ratio works really, really well. So, if you're watching at home and you want to go a step further, you can set up a worm bin. And the way that he's done in the past is like a 100-gallon smart pot. He's even recommended those dumpster bags that waste management drops
I
off.
have to
Like
check
fold
back
out,
with me on the
fill it with
rebound,
compost
cuz
and
ain't
get
ready.
worms in it. But he makes a thermophilic compost. Then he adds worms to it later once it cools down, and he uses barley straw, and that is one of the base ingredients that he adds in there for a lot of the carbon. And then he adds a whole bunch of greens, and so you can look up that recipe. Comfrey is a
another
green that a lot of
thing
people use.
fuck with.
Essentially, we need to make a compost. Then he adds a few ingredients. Now, over the years, they've evolved a little bit. I want to grab the kit and show you, and I'll talk about the ingredients so that at least you know where I'm coming from. And just Google Clackamas Coot soil recipe, and you'll find a ton of information about this soil recipe in particular, and it's very simple, so we can talk about every ingredient. And I think one of the things that's neat is anywhere in the world, no matter where you live, if you understand each ingredient, you can duplicate this recipe. You don't have to buy anything from Build a Soil, and that's a big part of the do-it-yourself philosophy. So let's talk about it. I've got the kit here, which we're going to make available to you. You can get all of this delivered to your home, or you can go source all of it individually. The bulk of what you see here is the base. We have the aeration is one part, and it's a 3-part recipe. We have the peat moss, which is the second part, and we have all of the worm castings, which is the third part. They're all equal parts by volume, not by weight. And so what I mean by that is rice hulls, 1 cubic foot, a lot lighter weight than 1 cubic foot of worm castings. And when you find these old school recipes, a lot of times you'll see people say 40 pounds of worm castings. Well, is that wet, dry? So I like to go by volume when it comes to things that have moisture in them. So that might help you if you're shopping on the market. Some people sell castings by the pound. It's okay as long as it's a fair price, but it can get a little confusing when it comes to moisture content. A cubic foot for our purposes, we like to say is about 7.5 gallons. Depending if it's wet or dry, fluffed or smashed. The equal parts that we're using to make 18 cubic feet, 6 cubic feet of aeration, 6 cubic feet of peat moss, 6 cubic feet of worm castings. Now, I'm going to talk about that because there's a few different ways you can break this up. The peat moss. This is a 3.8 cubic foot bale, and you'll notice it's in writing here on the bale. You can get these locally. You don't have to buy them from us. And this is responsibly harvested from Canada. Some people use cocoa coir for this, but that's not the Coot's recipe. He uses peat moss, and he's adamant about it, and we really like that as well. So 3.8 cubic feet, you might say, that's not 6 cubic feet. That's compressed, so don't let it trick you. It's actually more than 6 cubic feet when you fluff it, but when you fluff it by hand and you measure it, it's about
check back with me another
time.
I don't know what's going on with my opponent.
Guys on the forums have always used, and so we're just making sure we keep the integrity of the recipe. Now on the aeration side, we have 2 types of aeration. Even though it's one part, we have rice hulls. And rice hulls is a natural way